Hi, everybody. We are here at a conversation with several of the short film filmmakers at the 2021 Global Film Festival. We will be discussing Make-A-Wish with Edward Hong, Last Strike with Zan Gillies, and What's Out There with Ted Hogeman. We will be possibly discussing spoilers, so if you have not seen each of the three shorts, I highly recommend you stop this video and go check out those other short films before continuing. But that said, let's do some filmmaker introductions. Edward, let's start with you.
Hi, I graduated in '09, and my participation with this short film Make-A-Wish is I was the producer and main actor for the short film. I worked this alongside my real life partner and also who plays my partner in the short film, Josephine Chang, who was the other producer and was the one who created or basically brought this to inception. And so we all kind of followed her lead from there.
And Zan, how about you?
And I'm Zan Gillies. I wrote and directed Last Strike. It was my thesis film at American University, and I did it alongside a number of other William & Mary people, including one Ted Hogeman, who is in this chat right now, and the sound support person on it. In addition to Chris Morillas, who was the first AC, and Josh Goldman helped out a little bit. He was also 2009 one. So, yeah.
And I'm Ted Hogeman, class of 2009, and I directed the short film What's Out There. I'm a location sound mixer and independent filmmaker based in Washington, D.C. So to start off the conversation, I figured, how long have each of you been making movies for, and how did you get started doing it?
Eddie, you want to go first?
Sure, I'll go first. I'm primarily not a filmmaker. This is probably my first time producing a project, and along with my partner as well. She and we are primarily actors. And so what came about with Make-A-Wish was that she needed better demo reel footage. And so originally it was just going to be a simple, like, we're just going to shoot with some simple camera, some room. And we had a script that a friend of ours wrote, Ivan Sang, who wrote the script years back. And she reached out to him saying, hey, can we use this? And he was like, sure, whatever. It's just collecting dust right now. And so when we came about doing that, then we got into the whole producing madness and all the craziness that comes along with it, which now that we have a taste for it, it makes me want to do it again. Also never makes me want to never do it again at the same time. It's a nightmare, and it is also amazing. I love it and I hate it. It's just two emotions at the same time. So in terms of you guys, I am not much of a filmmaker, but it definitely got me more into producing more projects, because I know for sure I am not a writer whatsoever. I try to write a page and then I kind of like has sweat, and then I just quit, and I just kind of like stare at the wall, which I imagine writers do anyways, but they go through it. I just stop. I just like whatever. So yes, that my participation as a producer will probably continue on as definitely in terms of the more genre filmmaking, because that's something that I really gravitate towards too.
I'd also say that I feel like being an actor definitely qualifies as being a filmmaker. It's fairly essential.
Yeah, that's true. And then eventually, once in a while, you do it long enough, you kind of start doing it anyways. Like you see and George Clooney, they've been acting forever, and then they're like, you know what? Let's produce some stuff and make some money while we're at it. I don't know.
Well, I feel like those are some of the people who end up making some of the best movies, also because they know what it's like to be a part of so many other parts of the process, and then so they bring all that knowledge.
Absolutely.
And they're like the most fun to work with, because then they understand that everybody's got their own thing that they're doing.
Absolutely.
Also, just count me on team. Please do this again, because I watched Make-A-Wish for the first time last night, and I absolutely love it.
It's so good. It's so good.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I was not sure what to expect.
So yeah.
It blew my socks off.
We'll definitely talk more into our films, because, man, yeah, I got a lot of things, great things for both of your films. Yeah, we'll get into that.
But Zan, how about you? How long have you been making movies for?
I think the first movie that I made, my sister and I made a movie when I was 10, I want to say. This was the first time I'd ever edited any, or no, I guess I was little. I was maybe 12 or something. It was shot on VHS-C camcorders, called The Alien's Ocean, and it starred me as a guy who was friends with a small alien toy, who gets kidnapped by a pirate, also played by me, and thrown into the pool, and then I have to rescue him, and this happens 4 or 5 times, and then the movie ends. That was the whole thing. It was 10 minutes long. We made 2 sequels to it. It was anyway. That was the beginning of my filmmaking career, and then I just kept going since then. So yeah, now I weirdly enough. So that was yeah. My sister's 4 years older than me, and we made that movie, and now we still have a production company today where we make actual movies, and or you know, at least slightly know what we're doing a little bit more. But yeah, so I started that, and then I just kind of kept doing it and didn't really know what I was doing for most of the time, all through high school and college, and now again, and I just keep doing things. And yeah, so Last Strike was kind of the first. I feel like Last Strike was the first time that I really like figured like, okay, I'm gonna like sit down and actually spend the time to like I'm gonna give it my all, you know, because I feel like before that I'd always kind of been like, I'll do, you know, I'll do it, but like, you know, I'm doing it for a project or I'm doing it for this thing or whatever. And there was always an element of like, oh well, it's not great, but you know, I had time constraints or whatever. And this was the first time that I was actually like, okay, I'm gonna spend the money, I'm gonna spend the time, I'm gonna like do all of the stuff that I need to do in order to make a film that is, you know, meaningful to me and something that I really want to do, which is, I realized, is a terrifying thing, because then if it still doesn't work, then you're like, oh, okay, maybe I'm just not good. Like maybe that's the thing. And that was a huge thing. And it was something even after I shot it, like it took me years before I had a version that I actually wanted to show to people. I did a version to turn in to get my master's degree, and then I just didn't show it to anyone for years, just because I was like, it could be better. It could be better. But I'm glad that I finally, you know, eventually went in and did it. But yeah, Eddie, I feel exactly what you said about like this. It's an amazing process and it's so much fun. And especially on this, like I got to work with all my friends, and it was like it was so much fun, and it felt really meaningful to be doing something. But then at the same time, I'm like, yeah, no, I never want to do this ever again. But also I do want to do it again because it's super fun. So yeah.
I feel like that's the weird dichotomy of making movies, is there's always you're in the middle of the process and you're like, why am I doing this to myself? This is terrible. I hate this.
Mm-hmm.
I could literally be doing anything else right now. But then you do get through it, and you just want to do it again.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah, well, especially on a good set, like on a set where you're having fun with people and you're actually enjoying it, and you're super stressed, you know, like, but at the same time, as soon as that pressure is released and you get through something and you get to the end of the day, then it just feels so much better. And then you're with the people that you like, and you get to celebrate the fact that you got to the end of the day, you know.
When I am a little biased because I was there when we were filming Last Strike. It definitely, it feels so good to go back to it years later and sort of revisit that work and be like, oh, that was actually a really fun.
See, that's why I waited
we filmed that over
4 years before showing it to you. That's exactly the reason.
Wait, so when I don't know if you mentioned it, I forgot already, but when did you shoot Last Strike?
We shot it in 2017.
Oh,
no, I thought it was 20. Wasn't it 25th? No, you're right. It was 2017.
Yeah, because it was right. Yeah, because we shot the main section in 2017, and then we had some pickups and flashbacks and stuff, most of which we ended up cutting. That we shot that right before Kringle Time in 2018, which was Ted was there for that also, a feature film that we shot the next year. But yeah, so it was 2017 to 2018 was when we were shooting, and then I think I edited it the next year, I guess, and then I just sat there for 2 years before I finally, you know, got around to hiring someone to do the actual color correction, do the actual effects, and do all of that stuff, and replace the music that I didn't have the rights to. And now it's making its world premiere in this context,
which I'm very excited about. I hope it spreads far. I'd like to see it in more places.
I absolutely agree. Like, I think it was just a bizarre, unique premise of just like, we're just following the life of someone who got struck by lightning 12 times. But then it's like, if I remember, story, now we're entering spoilers territory, where it's like, so the woman he met at the beginning of the short film, that is the same woman that when she comes back. Okay, so all right, so
yeah. Well, and that was a big thing that we struggled with, partially because like you know, when you cast I didn't really think about this when I was writing the screenplay, but if you write a sequence with young versions of characters, then you have to cast people who look like the same people, and that's really hard. I didn't realize just how hard it was. And we ended up finding people who were like, they were great actors, but I mean, they don't really look a whole lot like Joe and Alyssa, who were the main characters. But yeah, Matt and Lily, who played the young versions of them, came down, and we shot all of this stuff. We shot huge flashback sequences. There was this like whole other scene with the two of them as kids that we just like we ended up cutting because we just didn't really have time for it. And it was also just kind of confused. I think that highlighted the fact that it was supposed to be the same people, but also it made it was just kind of too long for a 20-minute film. It just kind of added stuff that was nice, but we didn't really need it.
So how long did it take the two of you to make your movies?
Well, I described it took me forever to make mine, but yeah,
break that down for us. So like how long was like the pre-production versus production versus post? Because a lot of that was the editing, right?
Right.
The actual production I think was over a week, or how long?
Yeah, I think we shot it. Yeah, we shot it I think over 5 days, and then I guess there were 4 days of pickups over the next year in various ways, but they were like mostly. I think there were 2 full days and then like 2 half days of pickups. But yeah.
For us in Make-A-Wish, because we shot this around September of 2018. So before then, it was like pre-production was about a month, which was pretty rush. Originally, this was for, at the time I was going to an acting school, they had like a film festival. So it was like the students, they had to create their films. And so that was what it was for. And so there was kind of a rush because the film festival date was on this particular date and we had to finish by this day.
And how far out was from when you started pre-production?
So let's see, the thing shot in September, the event was around like beginning of November of 2018. So we were given like 3 months in advance to be like, okay, start planning now because that's when you guys are going to do it. And so we started with the pre-production, and then we had a third producer, Diane Foster, who definitely produced features and shorts. So she was instrumental in terms of like when it came to the actual shoot itself and the days and weeks leading up to it. She was the one kind of putting it together while we were helping with other aspects. Especially for me, I was helping out with like once we had our director Din Tai, who felt like out of the blue because he was working on this is a guy who's worked on commercials. He's worked on things that paid much higher than whatever we could afford him. I just remember sending an email saying, hey, are you interested? And then he emailed back like 10 seconds later. He's like, yeah, I'm down. I'm like, dude, I haven't sent you a script. And so he was like, no, man, I love your work. Let's do it. And so
that's awesome.
It was great to have him on board. And so the shoot itself was 12 hours. That was it. It was a 12-hour shoot because it was simple. It was a one room. There's 3 actors and the circumstances that lead to it. And once we shot at the post-production, actually took a while. At that point, our director kind of was busy with other assignments. So it kind of led to Josephine and I to handle most of the post-production aspect. And the thing that Josephine also was very keen about, and that's also what took some time, was like, okay, so we had Asian and white people on board as actors and behind the scenes and writers and directors, but we were looking to see if we could diversify like the post-production aspect when it comes to sound, music, and that kind of thing. And so like I was like doing Twitter searches and like Facebook searches for like, do you know anyone that's like a black sound, like a post-production sound mixer, that kind of thing. And so that took some time, which we didn't regret because there was no rush. After we showed the rough cut to the acting school, and then we finished that assignment. In terms of actually polishing it, because we're like, hey, we should submit this to film festivals. It took about, at that point, about 5-6 months before we locked it down. We finally finished it, and then we started submitting to festivals. And so I thought 6 months was a long time for a short film for post-production. And then I'm hearing short films that take longer. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say, actually, What's Out There had a similar thing where I filmed it in September of 2020, edited it in order to submit it to an online film festival by October, early October 2020. But then the cut that's actually being screened at the Global Film Festival, I then edited over like the next, I mean, didn't spend 6 months on it, but sort of off and on over the next 6 months, sort of making little tweaks of things I wanted to fix. What was, if you're comfortable sharing this, what was the budget like for each of your movies? I know I can say for What's Out There, my budget was almost nothing because I basically filmed everything in my apartment. I'm trying to think of what
And you did all the effects yourselves in that.
I did do, I basically, well, I was initially planning for it to be a bigger, more elaborate project, where I was going to work with a few other people. And then I tested positive for COVID, like the one window that we had to film it in that month before it was supposed to be submitted to the film festival. And so in my 2 weeks of isolation stuck in my apartment, yeah, I basically ended up having to like learn how to I had done some animation work back in college and a little bit since, but I'd sort of totally forgotten most of how to do that. So I had to reteach myself how to animate to do the effects.
But you know, it's interesting. Because I had the thought rewatching, because I think I watched it when you submitted it for Road Reel, and I rewatched it again the other day. And I had the thought that that's one of the things that I always love about your film, Stead, is the fact that it feels like you're always pushing yourself, especially graphic wise and you know, visually and stuff like that. You're always pushing yourself to kind of like push the envelope a little bit farther and be like, but what more could I do? You know, like, yeah, and the fact that you're doing it in an interesting visual artistic way also, you know, the fact that the blinds are down so it's not, you know, it blends everything together in such an interesting way. Sorry, I don't have a question there. I was just
I appreciate it.
Yeah. But also, wait, I realized, did we skip over, Ted? Did you get to say your history with film?
Yeah, so I've been making movies for since high school, but probably like seriously more since junior year of college. And I started with the Apple Insomnia Film Festival, which was a 24-hour contest. And then actually 24 Speed was sort of my big kick in the pants for making movies. I initially just started doing it with roommates, and then post-college kept doing it. I've done 24 Speed, I think almost every year. And then I've done the DC 48-hour film project several times. And then my big thing is, rather than going to film school, I decided I wanted to basically just sort of work on making short films on my own to teach myself the process. I will say film school probably would have been a faster way to learn those things, because I'm also a bad procrastinator. But that's how I came into the film world. But I was to go back to the previous question. So Eddie, like, if you're comfortable sharing it, what was the budget for Make-A-Wish?
So the answer actually depended on, like, so we did a Kickstarter for the short film because so our belief was that, like, with the people we had on board, a lot of them were willing to work for free, because most of them knew our director and they were brought on board by our director. But we had to believe that, like, even if it wasn't like the usual daily rate that they normally would have paid, like the DP we got, Ruben Steinberg, he's worked on like much bigger projects, and so him being on board and he was willing to work for free, and I was like, no, we want to pay you something. So we raised about $7,100 for the Kickstarter, because that was like, we were trying to go past like what the barest minimum. So in terms of the actual film itself, before the editing, all the post-production aspect, that might have been like around $4,000 to $5,000. That was like in terms of paying everyone, like all the crew, actors, like director, everyone was paid. And then when it came to the editing process, a friend of mine who edited it, another short film I was part of, he was willing to do that for a very much lower cost. And so the most expensive part, and this is where the Kickstarter did not cover, was the film festival submissions. In terms of how much money did I spend on film festival submissions, I will tell you too much, because I can say I've submitted to probably 250 film festivals.
Oh, wow.
It was a lot. And so, so the first about 100 or a little over 100 film festivals, that was covered, like a little bit of the Kickstarter money covered that, and then the rest was credit card debts. That was basically what covered the rest of that. And then like once we started getting enough to film festivals, or at least the ones that people thought were important enough, then we started like asking for submission waivers. And we would just be like, we got into these film festivals, would you be down to waiving your fee or like at a discount? And a lot of them were very willing to do so because they're like, ooh, you got into this film festival? Sure, why not? And that's something now I'm learning for the future, where it's like you can just ask. I mean, they'll probably say no, but it doesn't hurt to ask, especially if they look at your previous films and be like, oh, it's gone into those things. Okay, we'll take a chance with you.
Well, that's a good life hack.
Yeah.
It is a good life hack. And so I've read like articles where this one guy, he's done other films that got into big film festivals. And then he had one short film that he didn't pay a single penny. It was all submission waivers. And I'm like, that is amazing. But that's something to learn. And so I can definitely say in the future, I will never spend that much for film festivals ever again, because my partner, once she found out, because I was kind of like, shh, no one will know. No one will know how many. Oh, and then she found out about it and she almost throttled me to death. She was like, dude, you better not spend another dime on film festivals. Enough. And
Just
so,
to say, based on the movie, I would not want to make her mad.
Yeah.
yeah.
One of the hazards also, I guess, of producing a film with your partner is that that you get into that territory.
I mean, like she is exemplary in terms of like she is like a born producer. Like she is very like in terms of attention to details, in terms of like monitoring what needs to be done and that kind of, like she knew everything and how to take care of that. And I was good with like the schmoozing part, like, hey, give us your money, especially the Kickstarter thing. Like I'll be like, hey, give us your money. And then I would do like actor or director shout outs if they were the ones who donated. And it started to catch on because actors and industry people in Hollywood love vanity. So they're like, ooh, look at Edward do like a PR write-up of everyone who donates to Make-A-Wish. I want to get in on that. And so then it kind of like that helped us with our fundraising parts. And then overall, if you include the film festival submissions now, it might have been now about $10,000.
Wow.
That's how much it costs.
So like, what's the average price of the film festival submission fee?
It depends. So American ones tend to be the most expensive ones. Especially because like a lot of our film festivals were genre film festivals or horror film festivals. And so the American ones tend to be the more expensive. Like the early submission fees, they can be around maybe like $10 to $25. And then the regular and late submission fees can go up to high like 40 to 50. And then like if you're counting like Sundance, which we submitted Sundance, we're like, okay. That I think they cost like $50 to submit for early submission fee. And then the international ones, that's what we started learning as a life hack. Like the really good international ones, like there's one fantastic like Macabro and like Morbido. Those are two very well-known Mexico film festivals that do horror films. They cost $1 to submit.
Oh wow.
So
yeah, that is a big difference.
If you make horror films, like look for the international ones. And then there's like there's the Puchun International Fantasy Film Festival. That's one of the top 10 horror film festivals in the world. They are free because the government pays for it. So if you make a really good horror film, you're like, oh shit, I want to submit to something. Submit to the film festival like that. You'll spend nothing on those guys.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Zan, what about you in Last Strike? What was the budget like?
I think the eventual budget of like everything was probably close to like 16,000. I want to say something like that. It was, I think like up through production, it was probably about 10. It was about nine or 10,000, I think, or maybe a little bit more. Which was, it was basically, due to a lot of people like Ted Hogeman working for like super discount rates, or stuff that basically like friends and family rates, and people working for free, and calling in favors and stuff like that. Obviously, I was doing it from my grad school, so the DP, my friend Ross Godwin was, I DP'd his thesis film, and so he DP'd mine. And there were a lot of people like that who just gave their time to to do it. But the one main thing where I wanted to, similar to what you were saying, Eddie, that I wanted to pay people as much as I could, especially if they weren't like kind of in the program, and then I quid pro quo kind of thing. but especially with actors, that I was like, that's a thing that, obviously Eddie, you and Josephine, like, who were the lead actors already there, and didn't have to worry about having strong actors because you knew that you were going to be there anyway. So
nepotism, yes.
And yeah, and although can I say also just like how good you guys are in that movie? Like, it's so. I assume we'll get more into that stuff later, but I just want to say, because I don't think I'd said it yet, but yeah, you and Josephine especially are just so, like, the dexterity of being terrified and super funny and terrifying at the same time. Like, all three of those things playing, it's just
a slightly exaggerated version of how we actually are. Like, that is our relationship in a more exaggerated form, because like my partner is like, she is extremely funny, witty, terrifying. Like, I thought I was pretty angry. Like, I remember being in college with William Mary, like in the fraternity I was in there, like, oh man, and we're so angry, he's gonna be angry about something. And then like that anger and passion carried over, and then most people are like, oh, Edward's so like, oh. And then I met Josephine, and I'm like, this human being makes me look like a midget, like just this tiny little person who's like eep, and then she's like this hulking demon. And at the same time, she's much better than I am in being polite at people, because I can be very terse with people. And so it's interesting having a person who, when she's playing Lexi, that very sweet person, and then that crazy other person, that is kind of who she is in real life. And then me playing Freddie is basically me. That's basically me. It's not really acting. It's just that's just me. I just get flabbergasted or flustered in very weird situations, or just anything, and really, and then I have to somehow.
That's a pretty normal situation to get flabbergasted in.
Oh yeah, just
the one in the film.
Oh yeah, just having a half naked man tied up in a chair presented as a
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but no, the line is God, what was it? Where the dexterity with which you said the line about like, please don't break up with me because I won't murder someone.
Yes,
I was just like, oh my God,
that's definitely credit to Ivan, who wrote that line. And then the other line that we really liked was like, after I see Brock being tied up in a chair, and then I go, but I wanted an Alexa.
Right. Yeah, I think that might be my favorite in the movie.
Yeah, so good. Well, you sound so. I think that's the thing that I love about your performance in that, is the fact that you're so genuine about it. Like, every line that you deliver is just so, like, there's no winking at the camera. There's no like, it's just like you're so in it, and it plays on both of those levels of being like horrified and hitting the joke at the same time, which is such a hard thing to do. Like, it's just
definitely credit to. I mean, yes, I think we definitely. Oh, what helped? Oh, yeah, that definitely helped before we shot the film. We had 3 rehearsals with Din, as well as having a writer like kind of show up on the last 2 rehearsals, and he would do rewrites on the spot, just seeing like how we were interacting with each other. And so those 3 rehearsals were essential. Like, basically, we got most of the acting kinks out of the way. So by the time we shot it, it wasn't so much about acting concerns. It was just like the technical stuff that we all filmmakers have to worry about. But then at least they didn't have to worry about the acting. Be like, okay, we got it in the bag. Maybe some redirects here and there, but otherwise, we don't have to worry about that. So
right, yeah. Well, and that's so much of it. I mean, like, that was something that I, on Last Strike also, that I built into. I mean, yeah, talking about actors and paying actors and spending time to do that. That's, I mean, if you don't have good actors, you don't have a film. Like, that's, and it's something that, especially student films, I feel like people kind of, especially filmmaking students, I think, kind of gloss over. They're like, oh, well, we don't, we'll get the actors, but the main thing's the camera, the main thing's the equipment and the locations, all that stuff. All that stuff's important. But if you have all of that stuff and then you don't have strong performances at the center of it, there's like nothing there, And building in that time for rehearsal beforehand to really work those kinks out, so that you're not having to deal with that with the stress of everything else and those intimate moments and stuff like that. It's just, that was a thing that I learned on Last Strike specifically, was that I was like, man, I am, as soon as we got to the set, I was like, I am so glad we've rehearsed this scene already, because otherwise we would be screwed. Would be so.
I think that's a really good point, though. It really is easy to get sucked into like the technology of it or the process of it, but it's really about people, not technology.
Yeah.
Like
Well, yeah.
a good team of filmmakers working together with really basic tools will probably make a better, more entertaining, more thoughtful movie than a group of people that don't work well together with the best tools in the world.
Right. Yeah. When it's like, I think about, I don't know if you guys watched High Maintenance. There was a web series and then there was a show. I think the brilliant thing about that show, I think it was, I'm not sure if this is true or not, but it was produced, I think it was produced or directed by a New York casting director. And that's why it's so good. Like, that's why it works, is because
Yeah, Katja Blichfield. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And so everyone who's in, it's all of these, kind of character actors and performances and stuff like that. And it's well written, obviously. But I think the thing that makes it work is that they spent the time, more than anything, they spent the time on finding the actors to do that, and finding people who could really delve into those characters. And like, that's what made that show what it was.
So speaking of that, one thing I think it'd be useful to talk about is, how do you find people? Like I think all three of us talked about how we did our films sort of on the cheap, and it was about finding, we sort of got people to do like the friends and family rate. As a crew member, I know I can speak to this as like, why do I work on a short film for a lower day rate? Is sort of, I have sort of three basic rules, but fundamentally, like, I, as a crew member or a collaborator on a project, want to make sure that I'm getting something out of it. That can be money if people will pay my day rate, but that's not the only thing, not the only reason I'll show up to set. If I'm going to learn sort of a new trick that makes me want to do something, if I'm going to have fun because I'm working with my friends, that's worth it to me to show up. But then I also would say that if it's an interesting project that I think says something good about the world or says something important, that is something that will get me to like want to come on set for less than my normal rate. And then I had a last one, but I'm blanking.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. That's basically my rubric also. I mean, one of my huge things is just people that I like to work with, or friends. It's just like, I mean, if either one of you asked me to do anything, I would be like, sure, yeah, let's do it. Like, that sounds fun. Like, that's the fun, the fun thing is like working with people that you enjoy working with. And if it's not that, I feel like for me, it's not even an either or of like, oh, I'm getting paid my day rate, or I'm working with people I like. It's like, if I have to get paid my day rate and work with people I don't like, then I'll be like, no, I don't know if I want to do that. Like, it's not worth the stress of working with dicks.
No, but I remember what it was. It was the other thing is, I think, like, if you're like trading favors, so like, if I'll work on your movie if you help me out with mine, I think is at least that's definitely something that I've been working to build in the DC area community with several other filmmakers.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. I was gonna say, like in terms of the things I've done in the past, or like people ask me, like, if someone was like, if it was a really good friend of mine, I was like, hey, I want you to be acting in this project, but unfortunately I can't pay you because it's going to be super low budget. Some of the factors I do consider is like, regardless, even if it's like a really good friend or if it's like a stranger, I do, for actors, like, is to take into account like, how good is the script, like, because the script makes or breaks it. Like, if it's a astoundingly good script, I'll be like, holy crap, I need to do this. I don't care if I get paid or not. Like, this is great. And then other things, like, if we were like, if for another project that we're producing, that if we're going to bring some of the same people, like, kind of keep in mind that we pay them pretty low at this time, that we want to keep in mind that if we're going to use them again, is that we will pay them higher. It may not be the daily rate that they normally get paid for, but just keeping in mind, like, just bumping it up a little bit, so that there is like kind of like this thing where, like, I do value your time and I want to respect you. I also know that we have our constraints, and I totally am fine if you say no, because you're working on like much bigger projects. So you're basically doing us a favor by like saying yes to this. So I try to like keep that in mind, as well as trying to like slowly bump up the rates so that they get paid more if we bring them back again. And so that, I think a lot of, especially indie filmmaking, is dependent on your friends and family. Like, you cannot make these films without the support of friends and family. And so I think that's essential to have. But at the same time, it can get into a slippery territory of like, I've seen cases, and as I imagine you guys did too, of just like those who kind of exploit it, those who are like,
Yeah.
oh, we'll have you do all of this and pay you like especially like editor friends of mine who they get asked by their director friends to be like, hey, can you edit like a feature film length and we'll pay you like $100 total? And I'm like, that's, oh man, that is garbage.
Right.
So it's kind of like also knowing, politely that yes, they probably mean well, but at the same time, you have to be like, dude, editing a full film, come on, you got to give me more than $100. That's ridiculous.
Well,
Well, I
yeah,
think
or you have to, like Ted was saying, like you have to feel, passionate about the project. Like, if someone who was like, all right, I need an editor for my feature film. I don't have any money, but like you said, like if it was a script and a film that I was like, oh my God, like this is like, I want to be involved in this. That goes a really long way. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that also, I think if that would be something to maybe hand off to somebody who has edited short films that hasn't edited a feature film, so that this is like their chance for a big break. I think, actually, Eddie, I think you put the really good finger on it. Goodwill, I would say, is one of the most important resources that indie filmmakers have, and do like value the goodwill that you have with others and treat it as precious. Like don't abuse it.
Yeah. Actually, that when you say someone who hasn't done that and they're more willing to do so, like our sound mixer, this fabulous woman named Venus Leon, she's never like done sound mixing for narrative short films or feature films. It was always been like either like music videos or documentaries. So she was like, oh my God, yes. And then we showed a cut and she was like, I love it. And it has to be like the passion to the project. And so I think what was great about it is that she would start using that as her real sample of like sound mixing. And now she's doing sound mixing for Dear White People, which I'm like, oh, that just makes me so happy when, you used us as a launching point to much, much bigger things. So if I were to hire her again, I'll be like, all right, you worked on some pretty big shows. Now I gotta pay you more because to respect.
Well, she did a fantastic job on Make-A-Wish. And I thought the sound was really good in that.
Yeah.
But I think it's a
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. No, I was just going to say that, along those lines, my sister wrote and directed a film that I shot, that we shot in LA in 2016. There was a feature length film that basically we ended up with like $22,000 to shoot a feature length film. And it was like, a low budget kind of premise, but like, and we tried to raise more and then it kind of didn't happen. And we're like, all right, well, like, my sister and my brother-in-law lived out there and then they were moving away and they were like, we're either going to shoot this film or not. So we're like, all right, let's just do it and like see what we can do. And a lot of the people that we got were what you were saying, Eddie, where it was people who had some experience but wanted the experience of getting a first AD credit or, getting a gaffer credit, the people who've been kind of working on these other films. And it was just people who we were super upfront with them. We're like, look, we got $200, like it's nothing, it's gas money, but like if you would be, interested in working with the team and like, putting your name on this thing, then great, we'd love to have you, And there were a couple of people like that who, one of our first AD on it, who this was her first thing that she did, she was 20 years old or something at the time. And now, she's like producing films and posting it on Facebook and like, and like doing her own stuff. And I'm like, yeah, that's awesome, And it does feel like, you feel a special place in your heart when you're like, hey, I feel like we helped with that maybe.
Well, I do think that's a really healthy mindset to have when going in this, because like we talked about earlier, it's hard. And I think sometimes some people can have the impression that this is like a cutthroat field, and it really isn't. It's really about the more people that you can help boost up and you can help lift up with the work that you do, the more other people will help lift you up, and the better it gets for everybody.
Yeah.
So one thing I want to talk about is all three of the films tap into broader themes. So with Make-A-Wish, definitely the like racism of the Brock character is tapping into a much broader thread than the sort of self-contained story. With Last Strike, we have sort of issues of fate and not knowing one's place in the universe. My movie about a person locked in their apartment, I don't know what that could be connected to.
Right. Who knows? Yeah.
I will say, actually, for what's out there, I actually wrote the script or wrote the initial like notes for the script back in 2018. And one of the reasons I didn't film it before then was I personally like to tap my movies into I want to make sure they're about something or about have some broader theme than just what the movie is about itself. But I couldn't figure out what that little piece was, what that piece was to it. And then in 2020, when I was going back through my notes, wanting to do a film project during the summer, I just sort of wrote ha 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 at the end of it, because now I definitely knew what it could be about. But when do like, how much does theme play into the movies you decide to make, and when in the process do you start thinking about that?
I would say for me, in terms of projects that I'll be interested in producing more in the future, is that like, and what, like, this was a great launching point, especially for Josephine and I, in terms of like our sense of humor and like what kind of characters and films we like to see and make, is that we do take a lot of inspiration from especially like the Korean film cinema, because they don't really have genre set. Like the most recent example would be like Parasite, where it starts off as like a comedy, and like, oh, this seems pretty funny, like ha 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 ha, oh my god, like this has gone really, really dark real fast. And so a lot of Korean films tend to do that. Like they just mix genres. So you're not quite sure if it's a comedy or drama, or becomes slapstick, and it becomes like some terrible, like atrocious horror film. Like it just bounces all over the place, which is something that I like seeing in films. And that's something I like definitely gravitate towards to as an actor, where like the tone shifts because it keeps the audience on their feet. And so that is something we want to keep in mind for the future as we continue the journey.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I had the same feeling watching Make-A-Wish as I did during watching Parasite, with that shift, that tonal shift. Like I remember in Parasite having which actually I saw a Global Film Fest last year, before the world shut down. But yeah, I remember having a moment halfway through that movie of just being like, I'm just going to stop trying to figure out what movie I'm watching. I'm just going to watch it. Like I'm going to stop trying to figure out like what genres. I'm going to stop trying to figure out what's going to happen. Like I'm gone at this point.
Yeah, when we first submitted to it, like my partner was like, we didn't think we made a horror film. The only reason why we started submitting to horror film festivals was that like there was one British film festival when we submitted to like comedy category, and then they were like, it is funny, and then they gave us notes right away, and they're like, but you submitted to the wrong category. We're gonna switch you over to the horror category, because that's where it probably resides more. And then when I told Josephine that, she was like, I hate horror films though. I never watch horror films. I despise them. I never thought I had to be in one. And now that we were getting to all these horror film festivals, I would have to have her sit with me and be like, if we do Q&As with other short films in our blog, she's like, oh God, like, oh man, everyone's getting murdered. I'm like, but we're murdering here right now. And also like the projects that we have brainstormed for the future, they all involve murder. So come on, man, you do like horror, whether you like it or not.
I think that's a classic thing of people not realizing that they appreciate horror films more than they do.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's like the one genre where like I would say like the horror genre, especially the people that gravitate towards it, is just like it's the most crazy out there thinking, and you can cover so many relevant topics and get away with it. Like you can have, whether it be monsters or aliens and that kind of thing. And it says so much about our current society, which in a very creative way. And so that's something I truly appreciate. And then just like the fervor of the horror fans, it's out of this world. Like how crazy these guys get. I think the craziest ones we saw is, I don't know if it's a stereotype or it's because it's like I just think of like how crazy Latino Americans are for soccer, but it seemed to apply for the horror films. They just go nuts about it. And like I see their horror films and it is mind-boggling, like some of the creative ingenuity in terms of like what they do with the cameras, the characters, the blood, the gore. I'm like, Americans can't even touch this. Like this is like out of this world. But anyways,
well, I think horror is
unbridled, right? It's very like unbridled. It feels like it's just kind of like, all right, like nobody's gonna like just do whatever, like people like Sam Raimi or like Peter Jackson. Like I remember like seeing them for the first time and being like, oh, you just don't give a shit. Like you're just doing whatever at this point. Like, and it's just like, and it's fun to see like someone just being like, I don't know, what if we put a camera on a board and just run it through the woods? Yeah, sure, let's try it. Yeah, I'll agree. I feel like that horror especially has. I feel like its place in film in general in terms of being like less taken seriously, that gives it and people thinking that they don't like it, you know, gives it that freedom to just be like, well, no one's gonna, slip in some social commentary, sure, like slip in this thing, do anything with the camera, throw in the gore, like whatever.
It is underappreciated because I'm like, I remember watching Hereditary with Toni Collette, and I'm like, she's giving a phenomenal performance, but she will never be nominated because people have that aversion to horror. I'm like, dude, this woman is acting her butt off. Like it is like it's insane. But I think people, because the whole horror thing, they're like, we're not going to give the Oscar nominations because we like the boring Oscar films. I'm like, no, man, you got to give Toni Collette some nods.
The thing I love about horror is I think that it is one of the more subversive genres of film because it's about things going wrong in a hyperbolic way.
Right.
Yes.
And so, and also people aren't expecting their horror films to teach them something. So it's actually a great vector to sort of incept ideas into your audience.
Oh, also to toss it your way, because watching what's out there, like what I love about that is like it made me think of one of my favorite horror films of all time, because it always has one of the darkest endings I've ever seen, is The Mist. Like I thought of The Mist, and I'm just like, this feels right at home with that. Like especially when the monsters would come out and you're just like freaking the fuck. Which, by the way, you do a great job, because there's one thing I remember from years back is just like, you're so good at just like fear, at showing fear and like paranoia and delusion. You're like, oh my god. And so especially having all the critters come out, and I'm like, man, it made me think of The Mist, which, by the way, probably I don't think any film, I'm pretty sure there are, but it's one of the darkest endings to a film I've ever seen. Like it's just, you just can't go blacker than that.
I really, really appreciate that, because The Mist is actually one of my favorite short stories / novellas, and then I'm actually a big fan of the movie too. So that really warms my heart. But Zan, tell me a little bit more about like what was the thinking behind the themes in Last Strike?
All right, that's right. Sorry, we got off on horror films, and I got super.
No, but it was a good tangent.
Something else.
And I'm fascinated. Eddie, I'm kind of fascinated that Josephine didn't think it was a horror film, because it definitely is, as a fan of the horror genre, definitely a horror movie. Like it's a horror comedy, which is probably my favorite genre of all time.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely a horror film, and it hits all the things that make horror films great in that short.
Yeah.
But Last Strike, what? Because
right, yeah. I mean, well, it's interesting that you brought up the quarantine thing with what's out there, because I feel like that, I mean, even though we made Last Strike before quarantine, I was thinking recently about how I feel like that premise meant, like, it meant one thing to me when I wrote it, and then it meant something different to me when we shot it, and now it means something different to me now, you know, like in the current world, looking back and finishing it and being like, oh, I feel like I'm taking different things from this now. Obviously, I'm in a position of having to think about it more than anyone else in the world, so I'm probably reading too much into it. But I feel like, in a sense of, well, I feel like, I don't know. So Last Strike was, the reason that I wanted to do it as my thesis film was because the premise of it kind of scared me, that like it was an idea that I thought was interesting. I was actually, I think I initially had the idea because an ex-girlfriend of mine, when we were dating, was on a plane that was struck by lightning. And it was like, everyone was fine. It was like the plane was on the runway and it got struck by lightning. But she told me this and I was like, oh my God. And then like, my first thought was like, did you like piss someone off, or like what happened? Why did you get struck by lightning? I was like, it's interesting that was like, I didn't say that to her initially, but I realized that I was like, yeah, that when something happens to you that like by all chances like shouldn't happen, like there is that thought of being like, does God hate me? Like what's going? I'm not even a religious person. I'm agnostic at best, and like, but like there is that feeling of, and I started thinking about like, okay, there are people who have been struck by lightning 8, 9 times, like it's a thing that's happened to people. I was like, at what number do you start going like, okay, what am I doing wrong here? Like, what's the thing, and so there was something I just liked about that, but also it felt like such a huge thing that I didn't really know what it was about. And especially I was like in my 20s, it was during the Obama administration, everything was nice, and then I remember, kind of coming back to it in 2016, and I had turned 30 and gone through a breakup, and like, Donald Trump got elected and all of that stuff. And I remember looking at it again and being like, oh, I think I'm like latching on to that desperation a little bit more now. But yeah, no, but I mean, I feel like with that, especially, it felt it felt important to me not to make it specifically about one thing, not to take a large issue like depression or isolation or like mortality or whatever, and like dumb it down into this metaphor, but to use a simple metaphor to make it about everything in a sense. I mean, I feel like my favorite types of films are like, they're like tarot cards. I feel like all films are in a sense. They're like tarot cards where they don't tell you who you are, but they show you who you are based on what you take from it. And so those, I think there were elements of that at least I tried to build into Last Strike in terms of being like, all right, well, when I first made this, it was about one thing, but now I look at it and, I'm thinking about how I've experienced quarantine this past year and how I've realized about myself, how left to my own devices, I do tend to isolate myself from people, how much I rely on constant social interaction in order to keep up friendships and stuff like that. And without that structure, it's easy to isolate yourself, especially if you're an introvert. And then it's easy once you've isolated yourself to feel like the universe hates you and to start going like, those people don't want to see me. Like, yeah, it's fine, and like how quickly that can happen, And so now when I watched the film again recently, when I was doing the final edits on it, I was like, that's what it's become about for me, and I experience it in a totally different way now. I'm not trying to make it sound like it's a fucking masterpiece or anything. Like there's lots of stuff that I would change about it too. But that's at least my intention, is something that with all of this stuff where the themes are very human, but not human, but universal in the same way. And that sounds very, now when I say that, it sounds like I just said nothing, but
no, I feel like I'm picking up what you're putting down, of the idea of there's not necessarily a specific theme, but you're sort of starting off with that seed of an idea and you're letting it branch into multiple possible interpretations.
Yeah, and kind of, I mean, I think it's also just a general, I mean, I love films where you feel like you watch it and then you feel like you know something about the person who wrote it or directed it. And I feel like this was kind of I felt like I wanted to use Last Strike as just a means to just put the stuff that I am thinking about in there. If it's like, oh, well, yeah, I mean, I do think that the universe is probably ultimately uncaring, but probably has a sense of balance to it. Like I think that's an interesting thing to play with. So I wanted to, bring in the metaphor of the universe of the starfish and play with that. And I think that these are interesting things to play with, which are I would think universal themes of stuff that we're all kind of going through. And ultimately it's just about existing in a world that might or might not care about you. And we're all going through that. So yeah.
It's funny you say that, like when you revisit something you made, whether it's like, yeah, like you're saying, you're looking at the final edits or things like that. When we made Make-A-Wish and then we were screening it, especially like last year, and especially when we did a first rough cut, what we got mainly from it was just like, yeah, there are the horror comedy elements, but then it was just like the relationship between the two. But it's interesting that when a film, like when you watch it again in a certain timeline, things can change depending on what's happening with that timeline. And I bring that up because especially with here in America, with like a lot of the anti-Asian sentiment and all the crap that's going around, especially the last week or so, people who have watched Make-A-Wish in that last week, who have never watched it before, they're watching it now. They're giving me feedback that was very different from like before, in the sense of it was like a cathartic release. It was like that kind of thing, especially if it's like Asian American people I know who are watching this film, compared to like people who watched it before, they would just be like, haha, you and Josephine are so cute and so like evil. Now what they're taking away from Make-A-Wish is just like the racism that comes out of an individual, which maybe they kind of hide it at first, but then just comes out spewing. And then sort of like the thing that people are saying, this is why people like Dexter or Breaking Bad, the characters that do bad, but because they're doing it for the right cause, or at least what they think is the right cause. And so they found cathartic release in terms of like with Freddie and Lexi, what they were doing to Brock, because of like the racism that he was just spewing out. And that was something that like now I'm seeing on Facebook and social media, like Asian people I know just telling their stories of their childhood trauma and everything they went through. And it's just kind of like, we this is something we all knew, but it's kind of like because of like what's happening with this country right now, that it just kind of just spills out. It's almost like everyone just, all the things that were repressed is coming out, which now I understand, like when I see like Korean cinema and Latino cinema, it's just like that's what it is, unbridled, like what you said. It's just like all this shit that was festering, they just put it in their films. And it's like for someone who, you know, for the most part had like a pretty well-to-do life, you watch something like that, you're like, holy crap, what am I watching? Because it is like so much. And so, and that's something that I see the appreciation of like filmmaking, like with yours, and is just like, you know, you come out of it like, you know, where you are in your life, you will see the film differently. Like, you know, from this to another, like whether it be like the pandemic, or you just got out of a breakup, or like there are two very different circumstances. And I think that's what I'm gonna say. What's great about your film is that, like, if I were to watch this, let's say after my breakup, or like if I were to get struck by lightning, or I get into a terrible car accident that no one else got affected by, but it was just me, like that was what's the strength of your film, especially with your main actor, is just like, it's like, it's really difficult to tell an actor, like, act like you got hit by lightning 12 times. Like, how do you act that? Like, what is that? You either get it or you intuitively get it, or, you know, and then the guy, just the looks alone, it was like he didn't have to say a word. I get it. He looks like he got struck by lightning 12 times, and he is just barely hanging on. And that's something that's great about, like, you know, the right casting, storytelling, that kind of thing. It makes life so much easier, especially with your main actor, who is just like, yeah, he looks like he is a mess. Like, it's just, that's what he looks like. And
Right.
so it just does so much of the work for you. And that's what I appreciate about especially your film.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I got super lucky by finding Joe. I mean, I cast Alyssa, who played Elaine, first because I knew her, and then I've been looking for someone to play the main character, and I did like a nationwide backstage casting call and got like, which is a mistake to do, by the way, to post a nationwide casting call and put any amount of money attached to it. You will get actors from all over the world, and you'll get thousands of them. Like, it is like. There were literally 2,000 people applying for this role in a student film, and I was just like, "Oh God, okay, this is too much." But even with that, I found a hard time finding someone who did commute. I mean, for both of the roles, but especially for the main character, finding someone who like looked like they'd been through some stuff, you know, like who could really communicate that. And then Alyssa introduced me to Joe, and yeah, and I was just like, okay, I mean, it's different from what I was imagining, but as soon as we did the Zoom audition, and I was, or I think we did it in person, but you know, I'm just used to Zoom things now. But yeah, and as soon as we did it, I was like, okay, thank God, like, yeah, you're you're doing it now, you know, because like, yeah, I feel like that's the you know, the nice thing is that, like, you can write, I feel like it glosses over the problems of my script when I have people like that who can say the lines and be convincing and like wrap it and justify all of it, you know, like you can get the dumb, I mean, look at Star Wars, you know, like you can write the dumbest stuff in the world, but if you get Alec Guinness and Peter Cushing to say it, it's like, okay, well, that sounds good, you know. But no, but it's interesting, you know, what you were saying, Eddie, about the idea of you know, the context of, you know, the fact that you guys shot that film, you made that film in a different context, and now there's this kind of the current context is unlocking the meaning in it. But I mean, I would say, I don't know if you kind of feel differently about this, but you know, it feels very clear to me that the meaning or it feels to me like those people are just now appreciating everyone's appreciating the meaning of it now in this context, that it's unlocking what was already there for you guys, right? I mean, because like, I think it's a very clear exploration of that weird, and again, I think this is the power of horror film, is to let you experience like, what is the worst thing that like maybe I could be justified doing to a person, you know, like in the worst context, you know, and like to really take you to that place in your brain of like, would I, like, if I were in this context, like how messed up of a person could I be, you know, like, and what would it take to get me there, you know? And I think that, yeah, those societal issues and stuff like that were already there and now are being unlocked. It is interesting to see the way that those that those things play out. I mean, like, you know, like think about like Night of the Living Dead or something like that, where it's like George Romero was like, I want to make a movie about people eating people, and then accidentally makes the most, like, you know, a brilliant film about race relations in the 60s, like, you know, and it's just like, yeah, but and watching it in a certain context.
Well, I like what Eddie, what you said about it being cathartic, because that was definitely, as an
Yeah.
audience member, that was my experience of it. When I started the movie and Freddy's put in that situation where Lexi is asking him to kill this man, it's like, no, Freddy, don't. Like, oh God, how is Freddy going to get out of this? And every time Brock says one more gross thing, it's like, killing is wrong. But would it be that wrong in this instance?
Hmm.
And I was amazed at how by the end of that movie, I'm like, yeah, choke him out. Like he deserves it. And it's, yeah,
It was funny because it was like by the end, we had a few takes of it, especially like when after the deed is done, and then like Freddy has to deal with the fact that he just killed a human being, and so there were versions where like how big is the release going to be, and so like I remember the first take being like kind of like a more like very naturalistic release, but then Din had the suggestion. It was like, we're gonna treat it as if it was kind of like a very larger than life Greek tragedy, or like a Greek situation where it's just big. Like he is just like gone into the deep end, and he's right there with Lexi, which is also like a good positive feedback we got from filmmakers who were concerned that they were worried that when watching, they're like, oh, this is another film with like some crazy girl, crazy wife, or that kind of thing. And it was nice to see that the fiance was met her at the same level. They were at the same level together, and now they're off like taking care of other things, like now and then, obviously,
yeah, the ending twist.
Fernando, Lexi's ex. And so it was funny doing that, because that was also like, we were thinking of casting, because we were like, okay, we were thinking of having some like a friend of ours just play a very small part at the end as Fernando. But then we were very like, we had discussions just about like, who would that person be? Because we were like, okay, we were both like, Josephine and I, like, I don't want to have like a Black or a Latino person, because I don't want that either. We just killed a white person. And then we like looked at Din and we're like, you look older and you're bald people are evil. Yeah, how about you? And then Din was like, oh, yeah, all right, fine. And so then we strapped him to a chair and like tied him up, and so it worked. It was just interesting, like when we make these films, like, we were thinking of the social implications of just like casting. It's just interesting
Mhm.
that you do that, which I know not every filmmaker does, because there's always like different fields of camera, like, just making art and not thinking about social implications. And then other times you'd be like, okay, if we have this person do that to another person, what does that say? Like, and then we were having discussions about that. But it's like, okay, if it's like a man committing this heinous act to a woman, or if you flip it and have like a woman do it to a man, or a woman do it to another woman, like it's just like these kind of things that we start to be more conscious about. And especially in this day and age where like it is becoming very hyper aware. I know some people will be like, it's cancel culture. Others, I'll just say, it's just like, I think we're just more aware than we ever were, than what our parents were back, or our grandparents. Like it's just a different time. And so I think it's interesting making films and also watching films under that context of like, what we're making films here, and like the situation that comes with it.
Yeah,
No, I mean, sorry. I just think that's a good point of when you are writing a movie, when you're putting together a movie, do what you do with a purpose. Like think about the effects that what you are doing could have, and make it intentional, and make it hopefully do something for good.
yeah, and to like call attention to the not just the unconscious choices that you're making also, but the choices that you're making that with good intentions, that like you were saying, Eddie, being like, oh well, we want diverse casting, but then if you cast a Black person in this specific role, it does the opposite of what you're trying to do. Then it's like, oh, now like the only Black representation that we have is this one character who's like a not a good character, and yeah, I think it's interesting how interesting and terrifying how easy it is to fall into tropes accidentally. Like if you're not thinking about it, like you were saying, it is a a thing of constant vigilance that you kind of have to be looking for. Because like, I mean, in Last Strike, I ended up with a cast of all white people. And like, I actively did not want that to be the case at first. But then there would be moments where, you know, I would be like, a lot of it ended up being kind of, you know, the people that we could get at the time. But there were moments where I was like, well, it would be good to, you know, have non-white actors in there in general. And so I remember, you know, thinking like, okay, well, yeah, like I think we'd already cast the two lead, or I guess I was just thinking in general. But I was like, okay, well, you know, the doctor character, you know, like he's a prominent role, and it would be good to, you know, see if I can cast a non-white person here. And then I realized, I was like, oh, if I cast a black person in that role, then I have the wise old black man trope. Like now that's the, you know, because that's his function in the story. He's the wise old man, you know, basically. And I was just like, oh shit. Well, like, okay, like, but it is fascinating because it is so important to maintain that awareness of what you're saying about what you're saying consciously and unconsciously, because it's not an excuse if you make that movie and you cast it in that way and it ends up having that implication when you watch it. It's not an excuse to be like, well, that's not what I meant. It's like, it doesn't matter what you meant. It's on the screen, you know? And it is, yeah, it's you know.
I was just going to follow up with that. Like that is definitely one of the challenges of filmmaking, whether, you know, as an actor or as a producer, director, or writer, is that you nowadays, to try to be conscious of that, but also to have like, what are the resources you have available to you? It's like for us, when we were doing Make-A-Wish, when we were doing the shoot itself, in terms of the crew people that we got, that what was the immediate challenge that we found was that like it was very, very easy to find like white men to do any of the things. It was very, very easy, like very qualified, amazing, talented white men. And so then you go from then and then to white women, and then you get even less. And then like if you go down to the other minorities, like of people of color, it gets even less. You have to like really specify your search, like to the point that you are like what I did, going on Facebook, going on Twitter, like, hey, does anyone know anything? And one of the interesting things that we came up with, or at least I got responses, was like, there were people who many of them were very helpful, and they had recommendations. And then there were people who were saying that what I was doing was racist, that it was like, it was singling out white men, being like, oh, are they not appreciated? I'm like, no, I appreciate them. It's just, that's not what we're looking for. We're trying to see what else is out there, because you kind of have to like scavenge, you have to scourge out there and find them. And so I think of like the more classic scenarios, like, you know, I always remember like when Ridley Scott was doing Alien, that Ripley was written as a gender neutral character, originally with a man in mind, but then it was only because Sigourney Weaver came into the casting room, they're like, well, maybe maybe she can play the role. And so it wasn't possible unless the script was like the writer actually credited saying, I try to make it gender neutral as possible because it could go either way. And so I think that's just our responsibility as creators, where it's like to not exactly have an individual mind. Obviously, if it's very cultural based, whether it's like a Polish family or Russian or Chinese or Japanese or Jamaican, yes, you know, that's different. But when it comes to like these situations, like, you know, how can we open it up in terms of that? And then, like you said, you know, you're conscious, like, okay, if that person gets cast, and then you're like thinking, oh my God, is he playing the magical Negro role? Oh no. Like, you know, these are things you kind of have to worry about. But at the same time, it's like sometimes you just go with it, because there is the battle of like the consciousness, and then the part of like, well, he was just that good. And then just be like, hey, you know, and then maybe you can have conversations like, hey, I'm concerned that this might have that trope. And then the actor might appreciate that and be like, hey, this is what we can do to change it up a little bit. And be like,
Right.
where it doesn't sound so much like some wise black person or magical Negro. It's like, if we have this, then it's just like, that's the input actors can have that can change your film. Where it's like, if you had concerns with it before, the actor kind of takes care of it, because you get the right actor, you get the talented actor, they will do magic. Like, they will do things for you. So
Right. And that's a great point too, of using using the tropes to subvert the tropes in a lot of ways, and saying like, all right, well, if we're ending up in that situation, let's see what we can do to subvert the problematic elements of it, you know, while keeping the representation in there. Yeah, that's really interesting.
So as we're coming sort of towards the end of this discussion, wanted to give both of you a chance. What would, if you could give advice to people who are just starting out now, what would you tell them?
Getting into, the question was like if they were getting into filmmaking.
Yeah, there's somebody sort of, say you've got a William and Mary student who's graduating in 2021. They'd like to start working in film. They'd like to do something in this space. What would you tell them? Both for making indie films or getting into the filmmaking industry?
Don't be a dick. I feel like that's my main.
That's
my main
pretty
thing.
solid, yeah.
Well, it covers most of the 10 Commandments too. It's just like, don't be an asshole, and things will be easier for you in general.
Yes, that I feel like that has to be like the #1 rule. I mean, like it's something that people will put like on the bottom, but I do think it needs to be on the top, because if you can just like, I remember watching Ted Lasso, and there was a quote that stuck out so much to me. It was like, be curious, not judgmental. And so that stuck with me in the sense of like, just be open to that and don't have any judgments and treat people with, you know, that kind of thing. And it'll kind of pay back in the end. And so, yeah, I would agree with that. And then the other thing I would say to aspiring filmmakers is just like, that there is like, if you have an idea or anything, like, to just do it, just write it out. It'll probably, I think like the thing to always assume is like, it'll probably be crap. Like it'll probably be garbage. So just do it. Like, don't assume that it's gonna be great or terrible. Just assume it's gonna be bad. Everyone thinks it's gonna be bad at first, but and you just write it. And then always there's a thing. If Sharknado can be made and has 6, then you can probably make a film. Like just do it. So
well, I think that, yeah, that's a really important point of this. The first projects that you do are going to be rough. They're probably not going to be great, but the only way you get to make great projects is by making terrible projects.
Yeah,
that's
there's
really
a great. Have you guys heard there's a great quote from Ira Glass about that I really love, where he says that you get into any given art form because you have good taste. You have taste in something, and you love film or you love music or whatever. And no matter what, when you start out, your ability is not going to be as good as your taste. So no matter what, the first thing that you do, you're going to look at it and be like, this isn't, why am I not Martin Scorsese? Like, why am I not doing something that's, you know, on the level of what I want? But it's just that you have to keep doing it. And the more that you do it, the more that gap closes between your taste, which is always has always been good. And that's why you got into it in the first place. And then your ability to make that taste happen. I will also say though, I feel like Sharknado is a much maligned series. I think there are many screenwriting tips that we can learn from Sharknado series.
I know for me, the advice that I would give to people is try to get yourself on sets. If you're interested in filmmaking, do a lot of the jobs. Like try doing sound for somebody's short film, try filming somebody's short film. The more roles that you do on set, the more you understand how all the pieces fit together. And even if you're just PAing on somebody else's set, like that can be extremely useful. The other thing is that when you crew on somebody else's set, you start to learn about what makes a good director. And I think, and what makes what makes a project run smoothly, what makes a project not run smoothly. And then if you switch to directing a project, that experience of being a crew member will tell you how to be a better leader to the people you want to lead. Because knowing what to ask for as a crew member so that you can do your job will hopefully help you as a director give people what they need to do the job you want them to do.
Yeah, definitely.
Agreed. Amen to that. Yep.
Well, thank you very much, guys. This has been a really good conversation. I really appreciate you two taking the time out to talk today. And again, great work on both the films, on Make-A-Wish and Last Strike.
Likewise, man.
Likewise, man.
And so we have to ask the final question then. What was out there, Ted? That's the real question that I want to know.
What was out there was the friends we made along the way.
There we go.